Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. I'm in a lot of places. In fact, I was just in a place to celebrate my birthday. Last weekend, the weekend before, I'm not sure which week this will be up yet. It was my birthday weekend. Thank you for the birthday wishes. The many, many, many birthday wishes. This is on backwards. I got lots of records for my birthday, which is what happens when you collect things. People just give you a lot of the thing because it's the one thing that they know you like. It was a very nice weekend. Thank you for your kind thoughts and making it so. I noticed that all of my birthday month picks had a certain jazz slant to them. Psychedelic rock is a direct descendant of jazz after all. Some do it in a Canterbury way, others in a California way, and some do it in a silent way. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my post tab. That's where I post the hints to what the next album is gonna be. I make announcements like part 2 of my Gabor Sabo discography overview finally going up. That took a while. I announce those over there. I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. All right, for the first time in a year and a half, let's take the plastic off a jazz record. So my copy is a US original. I got this off Discogs from Econojam Records. Great name for a store, by the way. Let's talk about this cover art. The cover of In a Silent Way was photographed by Lee Friedlander. It's a simple, no-frills headshot of the guy in blue. Miles looks up and past the camera lens, giving this otherwise personal and up-close shot a little more distant. I love the lighting and how it's cast this ring in Miles' irises, and I love the choice of the dark blue shirt, sort of pulling him back into this darkened background. It's understated, but quite potent. On the back cover, we have a pretty traditional design. We have another no-frills candid portrait on the back, this time in black and white with yet another dark-colored shirt. His other albums listed on the spine side, and liners by Frank Glenn. Quote, Miles the Dresser, Miles the Boxer, Miles the Bon Vivant, Miles the Pioneer. I use the word pioneer because over the past decade, Miles has been ever searching for new sonorities, new ways of performing his music. In essence, new directions. This very, very small text, Directions in Music by Miles Davis. On In a Silent Way, we have our band leader, the man celebrating his centennial this year. Happy birthday, Miles Davis. He is backed by Wayne Shorter on tenor sax, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, and Joe Zawinul on keys, Dave Holland on double bass, and Tony Williams on drums. In a Silent Way was produced by Teo Macero. Roll transition. Quote, in my opinion, the so-called contemporary rock groups are now picking up on the early Miles Davis, trying to imitate but never quite making it. The present-day rock groups, I am sure, dig Miles, but here again, it will probably be another 5 to 10 years before they really understand his creativity, his compositions, his mastery of musicianship. The cross-pollination between jazz, rock and roll, and the blues was inevitable, especially in the 1960s when all three genres were in respective fertile periods. You've heard the story before. Grace Slick dropped acid and listened to sketches of Spain so many times she wrote White Rabbit. The Byrds would get high in their van and listen to Miles' protege, John Coltrane. You also have organ-forward groups having a major moment in the 60s. The Animals, Procol Harum, Pink Floyd, and The Soft Machine. Obviously the Doors. Joe Zawinul started paying attention to the roads when he heard Ray Charles playing one on his soulful hits like What I Say. But Joe played the Wurlitzer first on Cannonball Adderley's Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. Miles Davis heard this track and wanted to include an electric piano on one of his own recordings. He tried bringing an electric harpsichord into Miles in the Sky sessions in 1968 on the track Paraphernalia, but this experiment just did not work. I cannot imagine that instrument anywhere on that record. Another experiment from those sessions, Circle in the Round. The first track in which producer Teo Macero made radical edits to a Miles Davis recording. Columbia Records wouldn't release Circle in the Round for another 12 years. Stuff did make the cut, also edited, also with an electric instrument. Chick Corea is playing the Fender Rhodes. In Martin Williams' New York Times review of Miles in the Sky, he dubbed Miles a member of the avant-garde. I don't think Martin was getting at Bartók or Stravinsky or even John Cage with that avant-garde classifier. Instead, we can look to something Miles said to Herbie Hancock. Quote, "We're not going to play the blues anymore. Let the white folks have the blues. They got 'em, so they can keep 'em." From now, early 1968 to late 1972, blues would slowly run out of Miles' music to be replaced by the electric, the electronic, the rocking, African-inspired, funky, and abstracted. Now let's zoom out and look at the world Miles in the Sky came into. Rock and roll has fully eclipsed jazz in the popular music sphere. Look at Miles' own label, Columbia Records, once a go-to jazz label with artists like Dave Brubeck and Thelonious Monk. They're now hosting artists like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago, Simon and Garfunkel, The Byrds, and of course, Bob Dylan. Miles only sold about 50,000 copies of each album he released between 1965 and 1968. These were some of the most turbulent years to be a Black American, from the assassinations of Malcolm X to Martin Luther King. Riots in Newark, New Jersey, Hartford, Connecticut, and, of course, Detroit and Chicago decimate these cities' jazz clubs. You also have a lot of urban renewal happening, basically tearing down Black communities to build other stuff. All of this is going to muck with jazz's popularity and ability to spread. I've also observed that the linear procession of jazz music gets a little screwy after Train dies in '67. Like Jimi Hendrix dying, and the places where rock and roll as a genre was supposed to go, dying with him. Now we have Alice Coltrane putting out crazy posthumous John releases like Ohm. While I love Free Jazz Train, I have to admit, Ohm even trips my breakers. 50,000 copies per album would be great for any other jazz player at this time, but for the guy who recorded the best-selling jazz album of all time, it's crap. Columbia thought it was crap. Miles didn't like it either. What they didn't understand was I wasn't prepared to be a memory yet. Wasn't prepared to be listed only on Columbia's so-called classical list. Miles was also getting annoyed over how the music industry pushed white acts influenced by Black music over actual Black artists. Think of the British white boy blues band boom of the mid-60s. the Blues Breakers, the Yardbirds, Cream. One could interpret this as a symptom of a music industry that was still pretty segregated in the 60s. There were exceptions, but even huge acts like Ray Charles were still largely relegated to R&B and soul charts well into 1967. The white acts moving in these genres, and even the integrated act, are historically better promoted because they're seen as more marketable than their black peers and originators. Pat Boone's Tutti Frutti is staring at me with a gun in its hand. On the other hand, who's doing really well pushing black art made by black artists? Motown Records. They are killing it in the mid to late 60s. They've got the Temptations, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye with Tammy Terrell. Miles threatened to leave Columbia for Motown several times and very publicly. A couple of integrated bands are hitting their stride right now, while Sly and the Family Stone drew huge crowds and had people dancing in the streets, and Jimi Hendrix was, well, Jimi Hendrix! Miles played, quote, a lot of half-empty clubs in 1969. That told me something. As if by divine timing, the woman who helped Miles navigate these new rock and rough waters sailed into his life. A month after recording Miles in the Sky, Miles finalized his divorce from his first wife, Frances. He met 23-year-old up-and-coming model, songwriter, and musician Betty Mabry. Betty was cool. She'd posed for Ebony, Glamour, and 17, among others, appeared as a contestant on The Dating Game, and she wrote Uptown for the Chambers Brothers, another racially integrated group hitting the pop scene right now. Miles and Betty were only married for a year. Miles implied that she cheated on him with Hendrix, but who knows? Their relationship reworked both their life paths. Miles put her on the Feet of Kilimanjaro cover, and he helped launch her music career, but Betty does not get the credit she deserves for bringing her old-ass husband into the future. Betty gave Miles a makeover, transforming him from this to this. She brought him to discotheques where he heard more popular music. Since she co-owned a club in New York, she was able to introduce him to the Chambers Brothers, Sly, the Fifth Dimension, and, of course, Jimmy. Alan Douglas said, quote, Jimmy was probably the only musician that Miles could not fully understand. He couldn't figure out where Jimmy was coming from because he wasn't writing any music. He was just flowing. Jimmy had the contemporary edge, and Miles was always reaching out for that. Doesn't Mademoiselle Mabry sound a bit like The Wind Cries Mary? Miles was hip again. I mean, sure, he was the definition of cool in the 50s, but now he's cool for the future, and he's got something to prove. Quote, I started realizing that most rock musicians didn't know anything about music. I figured if they could do it, sell all those records without knowing what they were really doing, I could do it too. Only better. Significant lineup changes take place through Feed to Kilimanjaro. 3 tracks are recorded with one iteration of the quintet, and the rest was recorded with another. Herbie Hancock pieces out. Chick Corea joins officially per Tony Williams' recommendation. Then Herbie comes back again. Miles put Chick on the roads. Sure, he wasn't a fan of the mechanics or how acoustically inferior it was or whatever, but Chick's resistance mostly came from not liking being told what to do. Quote, no musician does. But when I started concentrating on the roads, I came to appreciate all it could do. When Ron Carter departs, Miles hits up England to pick up new bassist Dave Holland. Miles knew he wanted guitar on his next record. Jimmy was his white whale, and others like Joe Beck just didn't quite fit. When Miles told Tony he wanted to hire a second drummer, he bristled and left for a time to form Tony Williams' Lifetime with an English guitarist named John McLaughlin. He had a long history on the scene. He'd played with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, pre-Cream, in the Graham Bond organization. I don't own a Lifetime album to show you, but I do own Extrapolation. Dave brought Miles to see the Lifetime at Count Basie's. Miles was blown away by John's playing and pretty much immediately poaches him for his group. By 1969, Miles is making clear reaches towards rock. But if you asked Miles, quote, "I don't play rock. I play black." Right before sessions on a project tentatively called Choo Choo Train, Miles brings in Joe Zawinul. Miles calls, pops the question, Joe says yes, hangs up the phone. Moments later, Miles calls again. "Hey man, can you bring me some music?" The Adderley brothers had wanted to record this thing, but he held off. Joe bringing In a Silent Way into the mix changed the title of the whole album from Morning Fast Train from Memphis to Harlem, or Choo Choo Train, to In a Silent Way. Joe's own recording of In a Silent Way sounds very different to the one we hear on the record. And that's because Miles scrapped Silent Way for parts. Joe was not happy about that, and he wasn't happy about Miles taking a composer credit either. Miles defends himself saying, quote, "If I had left that tune the way Joe had it, I don't think it would have been praised the way it was after the album came out. People were walking around mad because I took credit for arranging In a Silent Way, but I did arrange the music by changing it the way I did." Despite Miles' combative history with Teo Macero, see Miles trying to get him fired a few years before, he was the obvious choice to produce this thing. On February 18th, 1969, sessions begin, with short stopping and starting pieces that will be assembled into Peaceful. That one's gonna be a trip to have to read over and over again. John said, quote, "I didn't know what Miles wanted. Nobody knew. So when he started giving me these obscure suggestions like play guitar like you don't know how to play, when Miles had Teo Macero play the tape back, I was really in shock at how Miles had made me play in a way that I had not been aware of." Oh, that's another thing. Recording didn't stop and start anymore. The band did. Teo said, quote, "The recording machine doesn't stop at the sessions. They never stop, except only to make the playback. Everything that's done in the studio is recorded, so you've got a fantastic collection of everything done in the studio. I just pull out what I want and copy what I want, and then the original goes back into the vaults untouched. So whoever doesn't like what I did, 20 years from now, they can go back and redo it." This is a little convoluted, but I'll try to explain the best I can. He'd assemble 2 stacks of 8-track tapes recorded in 3-hour sessions. Each stack would be made up of 2 pieces, and these 2 pieces would be sandwiched together to form one side of the record. The other reason for this 2 songs in one format is because Teo and Miles had to be ruthless about cutting solos. We have the physical limitations of the vinyl record here. We can only have an absolute maximum of 24-ish minutes of music per side, but it's not going to sound as good if you have that much, so maybe we'll keep it around 20. Miles and Teo's cuts produced 33 minutes of music. Cutting and repeating sections, now that would transform 33 into your full 40. Now, I've heard from and read lots of sources that pin In a Silent Way / Miles in the Sky as the first time that any obvious edits were ever made on any jazz record. This was the first time ever this was used as a compositional tool. They're wrong, because way back in 1959, Teo was making cuts to Mingus In 1963, Bob Teal used a classical guitar to connect 2 parts of, I believe, Mode D of The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. I think it connects the trio with the group dancers. also in the realm of Bob Thiele and the realm of posthumous train releases. Two overdubbed Johns create a saxophone duet on Living Space. So there you have overdubbing used as a tool on a jazz recording. What made this stuff revolutionary in the Miles context was that the edits Teo made were obvious, deliberate, and confrontational. Miles bragged to sax player Don Heckman prior to the album's release, quote, "This one will scare the shit out of them." The track listing of In a Silent Way goes as follows. Taking up all of side 1 is Shh, with Peaceful. Taking up all of side 2 is our title track, In a Silent Way, and It's About That Time. That's it! In a Silent Way was released in September of 1969. It peaked at number 3 on the jazz charts and miraculously on the Billboard Albums chart at number 134. It sold 80,000 units, still not great, but a solid increase from the preceding Miles records. Columbia was happy. The fan base was not. In a Silent Way, and especially its little sister record, caused a schism in the fan base. Phil Freeman wrote, quote, "Rock critics thought In a Silent Way sounded like rock, or at least thought Miles was nodding in their direction, and practically wet themselves with joy. Jazz critics, especially ones who didn't listen to much rock, thought it sounded like rock too, and reacted less favorably." Martin Williams, the same guy who inducted Miles into the avant-garde, slammed it in the New York Times. It wasn't even a record review, it was a non-review. He opted out of reviewing this, writing, "The editing, annotating, and packaging are horrendous. Through faulty tape splicing, a portion of the music even gets inadvertently repeated at one point." Now let's dig into why each camp reacted the way they did. Jazz heads felt betrayed. One of their kings had turned his back on them by plugging in, cutting, and pasting, making an artifice of something that is supposed to be natural, going against the very ethos of what his genre is supposed to be. Sound familiar? George Grella said, quote, "Jazz was never pure. One of the best things about it. But jazz fans and critics have endlessly longed for some imaginary prelapsarian era, even for just a sliver of time where the music was perfect and pristine." As for the rock critics, rock and roll went through a phase of loving maximalist stuff. See Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's. This is kind of fading by 1969, though. I think this point is more relevant to Silent Way. Through the late 60s into the 70s, rock writers were trying really hard to legitimize their niche. It's similar to what jazz went through in the 1940s and 50s, shrugging off the reputation of drugs and loose women to be seen as highbrow intellectual stuff. Of course, the 60s were the decade of bringing high art to the masses and the lowbrow to the art world. Rock critics were trying to elevate their chosen genre above the status of kids' music. For someone of such an elevated status as Miles Davis to nod in the direction of rock, psychedelic rock at that, was a huge deal to these guys. Miles rebelled in a language that is familiar to us. The cool clothes, the double denim, the dark shades, the women, and the drugs. Freeman wrote, quote, "Miles was perfect for this kind of badass worshipping media culture. He's been a badass since the 40s, using the word motherfucker like punctuation, turning his back on the crowd, getting clubbed by police in front of jazz clubs where he was the headliner. It was in keeping with how we were being advertised to and how our culture was changing. The 1950s were a decade of conformity. Buy this kind of house, this model of car, these clothes, and this haircut. Wear these undergarments to fit into these clothes, to be with the cool crowd." Then came the 60s, when the hyper-individualist boomers came of age, all of that went right out the window. Buy this thing and that thing to be an individual. It's ironic, right? So there is your complex socio-political pop culture reasoning of why people reacted to In a Silent Way the way they did. Another accusation levied by both camps, Miles was having a midlife crisis. He was in his 40s now, but he's suddenly dressing in these new hip clothes, and he's going to the gym and working out, playing with these young guys, and he's married a 20-something-year-old. It's a textbook midlife crisis. But dare I say, what better time for this to happen than the decade in which the divide between the young and the old was deepest. Joe's Wed wrote, quote, "What did it mean to be an adult in the 60s anyway? Defending a losing war in Vietnam? Arguing for law and order against the civil rights movement? Embracing discredited institutions? Being adult meant doing the same things over and over. There was nowhere to go within the conventional modes of adult authority." Miles said, quote, "Musicians have to play the instruments that best reflect the times we're in, playing the technology that will give you what you want to hear. All these purists are walking around talking about how electrical instruments will ruin music. Bad music is what will ruin music, not the instruments people choose to play. Take that, boomers who hate on auto-tune." It is crazy to think that by the time Silent Way was released, Bitches Brew was already in the can. They were regularly playing this material live, and they were playing rock venues, sharing bills with Steve Miller and the Dead. Thanks to Charles Lloyd infiltrating the Fillmore, his Lovin' record from the Fillmore was wildly popular in '67. Miles was able to do this stuff. In a Silent Way was Miles' fourth of 5 studio albums in just 2 years. Never mind the live stuff. This guy was giving James Brown a run for his title as hardest working man in showbiz. This is reflective of the relentless turnaround in jazz music recordings. And that's kind of incredible when you think of the ensemble Miles is playing with, and the methods he's recording with, and the styles he's playing with. Quote, "They say that jazz has become menopausal, and there is much truth in the statement. Rock, too, seems to have suffered under a numbing plethora of standardized sounds. I believe that there is new music in the air, a total art which knows no boundaries or categories, a new school run by geniuses indifferent to fashion. And I also believe that the ineluctable power and honesty of their music shall prevail." This is connected to what Herbie Hancock was saying in the late 60s about, quote, "the concept that there is a type of music between jazz and rock. It has elements of both, but retains and builds on its own identity." Jazz fusion, baby! This ensemble helped author our understanding of fusion as we know it. Of course, John McLaughlin went off to form the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Stop yelling at me to cover the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I will get to it later. He plays with Carlos Santana as well. Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter play as Weather Report. Herbie Hancock, hello! Oh god, now you people will annoy me to cover this for the next 2 years as well. Oh my god, between Mahavishnu and Headhunters, I will be completely overwhelmed. Oh, what have I done? So, what do I think of In a Silent Way? This is me issuing the disclaimer that I issue at the top of every one of my jazz reviews. I will know when key changes happen and when meter changes, but I won't always know what it's changing to and from. I am not a musician. I will only be referencing super basic technical stuff when I must. And I find really heavy discussions on theory just disrupt interpreting the music anyway. That's what reviews of albums are supposed to be about. Interpretation interpretation over notation. I will be referencing timestamps though. These are 2 20-minute songs without any lyrics. They'll be helpful for you, the viewer, to know what I'm hearing, especially with all the edits at hand. In a Silent Way is an entirely different beast from Bitches Brew. Bitches Brew is a beast! The main difference between Brew and Silent Way is the mood. Bitches Brew is chaotic. In a Silent Way, shows restraint. It's really interesting that the aggression of both the live quintet before Silent Way and the Bitches Brew ensemble to follow are sucked out of the room on Silent Way. This is truly an anomaly among anomalies. But the calm is deceptive. There is a lot happening under the hood on Silent Way, especially the subtle interplay between our 3 keyboard players, Chick, Herbie, and Joe. They all have to share the same space and the same 40 minutes. You have to show restraint when things get that cramped. And when you don't know when the beginning or end of any given piece will be. More on that later. Keyboards are a huge part of Silent Way. You take those out, you don't have an album. Supertramp had the Wurlitzer, the Soft Machine had the Lowry, the Animals and the Doors had the Vox Continental. Why the Rhodes? It's a great touring bandmate for one. It's nice and portable. It stays in tune better than a piano. It's less prone to humidity, which throws all sorts of strings out of whack. You can amplify it. You can hook it up to a wah-wah pedal or run it through a Leslie cabinet, just like an electric guitar or a bass. Kind of hilarious when you read how Miles himself thought of the Rhodes. It, quote, has one sound, and that sound is itself. It has no other sound. You always know what it is. Miles prized the unadulterated Rhodes sound in the studio. The album opens with the organ drone of shh. That opening organ sting has never and probably will never feel like a conventional opening track sound to me. The listener is dropped right in the middle of the action. It's hastened by John's vague, unsure chord and the bass, all of our keys and drums leaping into the fray. Another key element of Silent Way is the cosmopolitan hi-hat shuffle. But if you listen to the complete sessions, you'll hear that Tony didn't actually play this way. It was Teo who took the minimal beat from another jam session, looped it, and made it the main event. We have a loop, people! A sample! Tony's hi-hat and Dave's 2-note bass line give everyone else something they can go back to. And the composition as a whole, a steady base to build itself upon, where I hear curiosity and maybe a little hesitance in John's note choice and phrasing, I get confidence from the mixed organ and keys. The organ is sturdier. Lines ascend and descend around the rigid chords with the pulsing bass up the back. I especially like the circling motif at 1 minute. All these guys are feeling around, getting everything settled, trying to figure out where they fit into all of this before Miles comes in. Everyone draws back for a beat. Tony kicks back into gear and the composition rebuilds itself. Dave plays that same 2-note bass line and another soft flurry of Rhodes leads into Miles' first solo at about 1 minute and 40 seconds. His playing here is intentional and relaxed. It might even be cool. This is not... I've always heard Miles playing on this LP as a natural bookend to the ideas he was working with on Birth of the Cool and Kind of Blue. I also hear hints of Seta on Sketches of Spain. This is deliberate lyrical playing, but Miles refuses to coast. He buzzes and bends notes, slipping out of some sustains and using dynamics to glide in and out of others. This is where Miles can get the most expression out of his instrument. I've always thought of Jimi Hendrix as a player who could talk with his instrument. Miles could do that with his trumpet. At around 4 minutes in, Dave elaborates on the bass line under Miles soloing. The keyboards amp up in volume and intensity. Just as shh starts to fade out, Tony's drumming gets a bit sloppy and John drops out. A quick dialogue between the Rhodes and the guitar acts like the slash between shh and peaceful. It reminds me of what Bob Thiele did with the Spanish guitar on The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. And here is the edit that has drawn the ire of many a critic and author, the tape cut splitting shh and peaceful. It's offbeat, shaving off the end of one measure. I'm not totally sure what Teo was going for with this, but it jostles the listener out of their zen state. Sort of a hard reset to get you back into what's happening and hearing something different. I find if you listen to the same jam for too long, you just hear the same things. With this hard reset, shifts your focus. Peaceful backtracks to the Tony hi-hat shuffle. John feels more comfortable. He's more willing to talk with the other guys. He's throwing out more confident statements that the other players can actually respond to. Wayne takes an extended solo at 9 minutes and 13 seconds. It follows Miles' calm, cool, collected lead, but with a little more warmth and brightness. The guitar chord that opened comes back at 11 minutes and 55 seconds, and Miles' first solo comes back around 13 minutes. Teo and Miles introduce a concept that they will run buck wild with on Bitches Brew. They dismantle the linear progression of time. Teo scrambles the beginning, middle, and end of this stuff, cutting, duplicating, and pasting sessions to manufacture closure where there isn't, or in this case, manufacture a beat where there isn't. It scrambles the role of artist and producer. Quote, "It is sometimes impossible to know if we are listening to the music of Miles Davis, the trumpeter, or of Davis Massaro, the composer-producer." You know, these concepts get crazy on Brew. However, here is the paradox of In a Silent Way. The timeline is non-linear, but the effect is linear. The closest visual representation I can give you is Lost Highway. I've always considered that film as kind of two loops that intercept at one point, but it creates the illusion of a linear film. In a Silent Way is doing just that. This time, instead of cutting the tape at the end of shh, it very quickly drops out. It gives the tune the illusion of looping in perpetuity. We've just passed through for a moment in time. And that's side one of the record. Because of how Miles directed sessions at this time, most of the guys thought that any given take was just a run-through. Chick remembered, quote, "When we recorded In a Silent Way, the song, he passed around a chart with a certain number of bars and chord symbols, and that was all. He never said a word to me. He just gave us a taste of direction, and we played the tune. He'd allow the musicians to create what they heard or felt. He'd allow it to be, and there it was." That divine conception Chick describes, and there it was, can absolutely be felt on In a Silent Way. There are these moments of awe and spiritual relief that are captured on certain recordings of music. I've identified the sun salutation, as I call it, on The Acknowledgement of a Love Supreme and Les Brères in A minor by the Allman Brothers Band. The hum of, I believe, the organ, but it could also be the hum of an amplifier, is the drone under John's slow waking. The music wraps its arms around the listener. The slow build of Les Brères is a deep red sun coming over the mountain. And Train's iconic fanfare opening A Love Supreme is golden and revelatory. This is like watching silent snow blanket a bitter cold morning. The roads are glittering and icy, peppering the scape, then play watercolor chords. It's blurry and it feels familiar somehow. There are three interpretations of the Silent Way melody. First by John, he plays it the loosest, then Wayne comes in and gives it some warmth. As he does so, John plays sensitive arpeggios dipping in and out of the melody. At 3 minutes and 5 seconds, Miles plays the Silent Way motif, as Miles and Wayne bring the sun higher over Silent Way, and John plays his glow. One of the Rhodes players, I can't tell which guy is playing what at this point, one of these guys slips out of E and into, I had to look this one up, F sharp. It's dissonant, but it's not overpowering. 4 minutes and 11 seconds marks It's About That Time. Streaming services don't use this subtitle. My copy of the LP does, and I think that's important. This is a totally different tune. Miles wastes no time getting to his solo, or rather Teo wasted no time getting to Miles' solo. Part of this solo was cut and moved to lead into the 11-ish minutes of It's About That Time. Miles plays in that same acute, relaxed manner over insistent clicking drumsticks and a tight 3-note bass line. The Rhodes either play with or against that bass line. When they go with the current, it sounds like a bass guitar. Around 5 minutes in, they introduce the central descending motif of It's About That Time. It is so fucking cool when one of them drifts out of bounds from 5 minutes and 15 seconds to about 5:25, creating more and more tension that doesn't resolve anywhere. It reminds me of when the A Love Supreme motif was played in 12 different keys in Acknowledgement. As John drifts through and around this central theme on guitar, at 6 minutes and 50 seconds, the organ comes back in. At 8:25, it comes back to stay, and the organ and the bass introduce the counter melody. This is the groove we'll ride for the next 5 minutes or so. After a lull in the action at about 9 minutes, we have to pull back to build up to something. Same device as used on side 1. It augments Wayne's second solo. This is my favorite of his on the LP. It's About That Time never drifts too far from the mood that the title track established. Even though it is a totally different piece, it is cohesive in tone. That is until halfway through Miles' second solo at 13 minutes and 10 seconds. Tony plays the rest of his kit. Teo has created the feeling of the aha moment in a jam. Though it's only 45 seconds of a nearly 20-minute song, this feels so consequential. It's a release of energy that has been so carefully crafted. I believe every choice out of the studio after the fact was made with this moment in mind. I'd also say that It's About That Time is made more potent by being bookended by In a Silent Way. The second time around, it feels more bittersweet, like we're closing the lid on this journey we've been on. About his and Teo's cut and paste method they mastered between 1968 and 1970, Miles wrote, quote, "If you've got some great musicians, they will deal with the situation and play beyond what is there and above what they think they can." The sound above! I lost my mind when I revisited this part of Miles' memoir and found a reference to what is basically the sound above. I've been using this term since my Can review, but I fully credit it to Marcus of the No Dogs in Space podcast. It's something that deliberately challenges you as a listener. The sound above the level you're on. I mean, that absolutely applied to Bitches Brew. This was the last time I covered any Miles on my channel, and the last time I extensively covered any jazz, here on this channel at least. I've done some writing in between. This record felt like a fucking marathon at the time. With this brain-bending context, In a Silent Way felt like familiar territory, despite its non-linear timeline and obvious edits. And I think that's due to the atmosphere this album melds. Miles, his sidemen, and his producer have exhibited mastery on this record. They've gathered all these elements over the course of a year and a handful of albums. The electric instruments, the rock sensibility and influences, the atypical song structures, and funneled them into one compact package, and they did it with grace and subtlety. It is the sound above, but it doesn't feel that way at all. It takes you by the hand and gingerly leads you through, as opposed to kicking you in the back and down the rabbit hole. Don't get me wrong, I love Bitches Brew for what it is. I love its grit and its unabashed angular weirdness. I love In a Silent Way for its gentleness, which not many post-68 Miles recordings have. After this, the feel of Miles' music is more curious. It's more harsh, dark, bossy, macho, confrontational. In a Silent Way has an ethereal, spacey, magical atmosphere. Like the cover. Just Miles in a darkened room, gazing past the lens into soft light. It's hard to believe this package didn't just materialize out of thin air. You can't force a shot like this, and you can't do much in the way of forcing the atmosphere. Did Miles really allow In a Silent Way to be, and there it was? No, not really, but it sure does feel that way. And I'm told jazz is all about the feel. This album is entirely comfortable in the in-between. It's not jazz, but it's certainly not rock. It's not easy listening or meditation music. It's not cool jazz by any means, but it certainly doesn't run hot. In a Silent Way is Immaculate Conception, and it isn't. My personal favorites on this one are... well, it'd be fucking stupid not to name the whole thing. It's 2 tracks! But remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is In a Silent Way. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Miles Davis? Leave a comment below. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Monday mornings at 11, and a new episode of my podcast every other Friday at noon. And if you so choose, you can become a member of the freaking Peanut Gallery, my patrons. You will get, by virtue of how this platform works, uncensored and extended versions of these episodes, as well as a little exclusive video every month. It gives a little extra support to what I do. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time, and let's hope I make it through the next 51 weeks unscathed. Bye!